She was standing at the edge of a floor-to-ceiling window, 47 stories above Chicago, when her phone started ringing. And ringing, and ringing. Names she recognized, numbers she didn't. People who had looked straight through her for 4 years suddenly couldn't dial fast enough. On the screen before her, one headline glowed against the city below. KW Group names Naomi Carter as general counsel, the most powerful legal appointment in Chicago this year. 4 months ago, she had been one signature away from losing everything. 4 months ago, a man she had never met sat down beside her at a party she was planning to leave early. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was capable of. She had no idea that the most dangerous man in that room had chosen quietly, deliberately to sit next to her. Stay with me, because the part that will break your heart comes before the part that heals it. If you're new here, subscribe now and drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I read every single one. Let's begin. The invitation had said, cocktail attire. Naomi Carter had been standing in front of her closet for 11 minutes before she reached for the black dress. Not because it was her favorite, because it was invisible. Clean lines, no statement jewelry, nothing that said, look at me in a room full of people who had already decided not to. She had learned that early. 4 years at Callaway and Walsh had been a master class in the art of strategic invisibility. She was good at her job, better than good. She had won 3 cases in the past 18 months that senior partners had quietly taken credit for in client meetings. She had billed more hours than any associate at her level. She had arrived earlier, stayed later, and prepared harder than anyone in that building. And she had done it all while carrying the invisible weight of being the only Black woman in every room that mattered. It hadn't made her bitter. It had made her precise. Tonight was the firm's annual charity gala, 47th floor of the Meridian Tower, hosted by Callaway and Walsh for their most important clients and prospects. Attendance was not optional. Naomi had confirmed her RSVP 3 weeks ago with a smile she didn't feel. She took the elevator up alone, adjusted her earrings in the reflection of the steel doors, told herself what she always told herself before walking into rooms like this one. You belong here. Act like it until they believe it. The doors opened. The room was exactly what she expected. Champagne in crystal flutes, white tablecloths, the low hum of calculated conversation. 200 people performing versions of themselves for each other. Naomi stepped in, collected a glass she wouldn't drink, and began the circuit she had perfected over 4 years. Handshakes, names, careful, forgettable small talk. She was halfway through her second lap of the room when Walsh found her. Raymond Walsh, senior partner, 17 years at the firm. The kind of man who had never once questioned whether he belonged in a room because no room had ever made him feel like he didn't. He touched her elbow light proprietary and steered her toward the edge of the group near the bar. 2 other partners followed, and Brent Holloway, third-year associate, Walsh's unofficial shadow, fell into step beside them with the comfortable ease of someone who had been invited. Naomi had not been invited. She had been collected. Naomi. Walsh's voice was warm, the way marble is warm surface temperature only. Glad you could make it. Listen, I want to be clear about tonight before things get moving. She waited. We have a very significant prospect in the room. KW Group. You may have heard the name. He paused, letting the weight of it land. This is a $200 million relationship, the kind that changes the trajectory of this firm. Another pause. I need everyone on their best behavior. That means staying in your lane, letting the right people lead the conversation, and not. He smiled, and the smile did not reach anything above his jaw, making our guests uncomfortable. The words were reasonable. The meaning was not. Stay in your lane meant stay out of the way. The right people meant not you. Don't make our guests uncomfortable meant don't remind them you're here. Naomi held his gaze. Of course, she said. Understood. Brent Holloway let out a small sound beside her. Not quite a laugh, something smaller and worse. He leaned toward the partner on his left and said just loud enough, Diversity hire struggles, you know how it is. The partner didn't respond, didn't correct him either. Naomi's hand tightened around her champagne glass. She felt the cold of it move up through her fingers, up her arm, settle somewhere in the center of her chest, where she kept everything she was not allowed to say out loud. She excused herself. The far side of the room had a bank of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. She stood there for a moment, letting the city absorb some of what she was carrying. 47 floors below Chicago moved the way it always did, indifferent constant too large to notice any single thing breaking quietly inside one of its towers. She didn't hear him approach. She only knew he was there when she registered the stillness beside her. Not a crowding, not an intrusion, just presence, solid and unhurried like someone who had also come to the window to breathe. She glanced sideways, and the first thing she noticed before the suit, was that every other person on that floor was watching him from the corner of their eye. At 9:07 p.m., Ji-hoon Kwon had walked into the Meridian Tower Gala, the way weather walks into a room. No announcement, no fanfare, just a shift in atmospheric pressure that every person present registered without being able to explain why. He was dressed in charcoal suit, so precisely cut it looked architectural. Dark hair, a face that gave nothing away. He moved through the room without stopping, without looking, and the room parted around him the way water parts around something that doesn't slow down. In the far corner near the service entrance, a man in a black jacket, not a waiter, not a guest, something else entirely, gave a single nod as Ji-hoon passed. Ji-hoon didn't acknowledge it, but he had seen it. Near the champagne table, a hedge fund manager leaned toward his colleague. "KW Group," he murmured. "You know what KW actually stands for?" His colleague shook his head. "Then don't ask." Ji-hoon reached the windows. He stood beside her, not close, not far, and looked out at the city. He did not introduce himself. He did not perform the social rituals the rest of the room was built on. He simply stood there looking at Chicago, the way a man looks at something he has already calculated and does not need to calculate again. 30 seconds passed. Naomi spoke first. She didn't know why. Maybe because the silence beside him was the first thing all evening that hadn't required anything from her. "This side of the room is less suffocating," she said, not turning. A beat. "Most rooms are," he said. She looked at him then. He was already looking at her, not with the assessing, cataloging look she had grown used to from men in rooms like this. Something quieter than that. Something that felt oddly like recognition. "Ji-hoon Kwon," he said. "Naomi Carter." He nodded once, looked back at the city, and neither of them went back inside for a long time. They went back inside eventually. Not because either of them wanted to, but because 47 floors of Chicago wind has a way of reminding you that the cold is real, even when everything inside feels less real than it should. Ji-hoon moved first, not toward the center of the room, not toward Walsh and the cluster of partners who had been watching the windows for the past 10 minutes with barely concealed anxiety. He moved toward a table near the far wall, a quieter corner. He sat down without asking if she would follow. She followed. The table had been full 5 minutes ago. Now it had space. Nobody announced the shift. Nobody was asked to move. It simply happened, the way things simply happened when Ji-hoon Kwon entered a radius. For a moment, they sat in silence, and Naomi waited for the version of this she had experienced before. The version where a powerful man at a firm event sat beside her because he needed something, a contact, a connection, a face to stand next to for optics. She waited for the ask. It didn't come. Instead, Ji-hoon picked up the printed program on the table, scanned it briefly, then set it down and looked at her directly. "The Alderman Group versus Northside Capital," he said. "That was your case." Naomi went still. "You read the filing." "I read everything connected to firms I consider working with." A pause. "Your argument in the preliminary injunction was cleaner than the lead partners. The judge cited your language, not his." She studied him. "Most people don't notice that. Most people aren't reading carefully enough." It was not a compliment delivered to charm her. It was an observation delivered because it was accurate. There was a difference, and she felt it. She leaned back slightly. Something in her shoulders, something she had been holding since the elevator doors opened, released by half an inch. The weakness in the defense's counterargument, she said, was the timeline. They anchored their entire case to a filing date that had a 2-day discrepancy. I flagged it in week 1. Nobody listened until week 6. What changed in week 6? A senior partner read my memo and submitted it under his name. Ji-hoon said nothing for a moment. Then, did you let that happen? I didn't have a choice that felt survivable. He looked at her, really looked at her in a way that didn't flinch from what she had just said, didn't rush to fix it or reframe it, or tell her it wasn't as bad as it sounded. You'll have choices like that again, he said quietly. The question is whether the room you're in when they come will be worth the cost. The words settled over her, like something she hadn't known she needed to hear. They talked for 20 minutes after that, about the contract law landscape in Illinois, about a regulatory shift in financial litigation that both of them had been watching with different levels of concern. He asked questions that were specific. She gave answers that were honest. There was no performance in it, no calculation. For the first time all evening, Naomi forgot to be invisible. She didn't notice Veronica Hale until the woman was already seated. She appeared from the direction of the bar, unhurried, deliberate, the kind of beautiful that announces itself without trying and knows exactly what it's announcing. A deep burgundy dress, hair down, eyes that swept the table and landed on Ji-hoon, with the ease of someone who had landed there many times before. She sat down on the other side of him without asking. Ji-hoon. Her voice was warm, intimate, calibrated. She began speaking in Korean fluid and fast, leaning slightly toward him, filling the space between them with a language that left Naomi on the outside of it. Ji-hoon let her finish one sentence. Then he responded in English. Short, even. Veronica. She paused, a flicker barely visible, then continued in Korean. He answered in English again. 3 words. His eyes did not move from the middle distance. Veronica's gaze slid to Naomi for the first time. The look lasted less than 2 seconds. It did everything it needed to do in that time, cataloged her, assessed her, and found her not worth addressing directly. Naomi had received that look before, from different women in different rooms. It always landed the same way. She held it without expression. Then Brent Holloway appeared. He had been circling the table for the past few minutes. Naomi had clocked him in her peripheral vision, that particular kind of hovering that means someone is waiting for an audience. He stepped in now with the confidence of a man who had never been told his timing was wrong. Mr. Kwan? He extended a hand with a broad smile. Brent Holloway, Calloway, and Walsh. I just wanted to introduce myself and say what an honor it is to have KW Group considering us. Ji-hoon shook his hand once, said nothing. Brent, undeterred, continued. He gestured loosely in Naomi's direction without looking at her directly, the way people gesture at furniture. I'm sure you're aware of the diversity initiatives firms have been navigating lately. Finding the right balance between representation and, well, a small laugh, actual qualification. It's been an interesting challenge across the industry. The table went quiet, not gradually, immediately. Naomi did not move, did not blink. Her face was a wall she had spent years learning to build fast. Ji-hoon set his glass down, slowly. The sound of crystal on linen was very small, but every person within 10 feet heard it. He turned his head toward Brent. Not his whole body, just his head, and he looked at him with an expression that contained no anger, no heat, no drama whatsoever, which somehow made it worse than all 3 combined. I don't remember inviting you into this conversation, Ji-hoon said. 4 words, flat, absolute. The smile on Brent's face didn't disappear so much as evacuate. He opened his mouth, closed it, took a step back, then another, and left. No one at the table spoke for a moment. Then Ji-hoon turned back to Naomi as if nothing had been interrupted. You were saying the regulatory language in the new SEC amendment. Naomi looked at him. He was already waiting for her answer. Across the room, one of the firm's partners leaned toward Walsh and said something quietly. Walsh's eyes found their table, found Ji-hoon, found Naomi beside him. His expression changed, and at the far end of the table, Veronica Hale had stopped looking at Ji-hoon entirely. She was looking at Naomi, and she had taken out her phone. Walsh found her 20 minutes later, not at the table, not near the windows. He waited until she had excused herself to refill her water glass, until she was alone briefly near the bar at the far end of the room. And then he was simply there. No approach you could clock in advance, just presence sudden and deliberate. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. They moved toward the hallway near the coat check away from the noise. Walsh kept his voice low, but there was nothing gentle in it anymore. What are you doing? Naomi kept her expression neutral. I'm sorry, don't. He turned to face her fully. In the low light of the corridor, his face was harder than it ever looked in the office. Kwon has been at that table for 40 minutes. With you. I told you tonight I was explicit. You are not to be the face of this firm in that conversation. He initiated the conversation. I don't care who initiated it. A pause, each word placed with precision. KW Group is a $200 million relationship. It is not your moment. You sit down, you smile, and you let people who have earned that table handle it. His jaw tightened. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She understood exactly what he was telling her. She nodded once. Perfectly. He held her gaze one beat longer than necessary, then walked back toward the room. Naomi stood in the corridor for a moment. The sounds of the gala filtered through the walls, music, laughter, the clink of glass against glass. 200 people celebrating a version of success. She had spent 4 years trying to reach through a door they kept moving. She straightened her dress, went back inside. She returned to the table and shifted professional, contained the careful distance of someone performing competence from behind glass. When Ji-hoon glanced at her, she was looking at the room. When he asked a follow-up question, she answered briefly and redirected toward another partner. She felt him register the change. He didn't push it. Veronica watched all of this with an expression of mild, pleasant interest, the expression of someone who had just confirmed something they already suspected. She waited until Ji-hoon excused himself. Then she leaned forward, set her wine glass down with a small, deliberate click, and looked at Naomi directly for the first time all evening. He's extraordinary, isn't he? Warm, light, conversational, the way a trap is warm before it closes. Naomi said nothing. He does this. A small, elegant gesture. Finds someone new interesting. Gives them his full attention. It feels like being the only person in the room. A pause. Because for that moment you are. She lifted her wine glass. The thing is, and I say this because I've been where you're sitting, that's just how he is with anything new. He's a collector by nature. Beautiful things, interesting problems, unusual people. Eventually the novelty fades. Her eyes held Naomi's. I learned that the hard way. No cruelty in it. No visible venom. Just one woman, sharing hard-won wisdom with another, from a place of apparent generosity. The most precise kind of damage. The kind that arrives dressed as kindness. Thank you for sharing that, Naomi said evenly. Veronica smiled, sat back. Naomi kept her face still. But something cold had settled in her chest, not because she believed all of it, because some of it had landed in the exact place she had not finished protecting yet. She was still sitting with that when Walsh returned. This time he brought company. 2 senior partners flanked him. Dawson and Reeves, the kind of men whose presence meant something was about to be made official. Naomi saw them coming and felt the specific quality of dread that comes not from surprise, but from recognition. She had seen this before, not to her, but she had seen it. Walsh stopped at the table. He placed one hand on the back of her chair, a gesture that looked from a distance like collegiality. Up close, it felt like a pin through a board. Naomi. His voice was warm, carrying. the exact volume of a man who wants surrounding tables to hear, without appearing to address them. I need to let you know about a personnel matter effective immediately. HR will be reaching out Monday morning regarding a review of your current client portfolio assignments. We'll be transitioning any active prospect conversations to senior staff. A smile that did not involve his eyes. Just housekeeping. The table went quiet. The tables beside them went quiet. 200 people in the room, and the silence radiated outward, like a drop hitting still water. Every face that turned, every colleague who heard and looked away. Brent Holloway standing 6 feet away, not bothering to hide the satisfaction on his face. She had been managed out of a conversation she had been invited into. In public, she stood up, slowly, completely steady. She picked up her clutch, looked at Walsh with the most composed expression she had ever assembled. 4 years of practice, every humiliation she had swallowed quietly. She put all of it into that look and made it unreadable. "Of course," she said. "Thank you for letting me know." She turned, walked toward the elevator, shoulders back, head level. She did not look at Ji-hoon, but Ji-hoon had been standing 6 feet behind Walsh for the last 90 seconds. He had heard every word. He watched her walk away back straight, chin up the dignity of someone who had decided that if they were going to break, they were going to do it somewhere no one could see. Then he turned. He looked at Walsh, at Brent, at Veronica, who had her wine glass raised again, watching the elevator doors close with the expression of someone watching the final scene of a film they had written themselves. He turned to the man in the black jacket, who had materialized quietly at the edge of the room. He said one sentence, in Korean, low enough that no one else heard it. The man in the black jacket nodded and left. She didn't cry on the way home. She had learned a long time ago that crying in the back of a rideshare was a luxury she couldn't afford, not because it was undignified, but because once she started, she wasn't sure she'd be able to stop before she reached her apartment door. And she needed to get through the door first. She made it inside, dropped her clutch on the kitchen counter, sat down on the floor with her back against the cabinet because the chair felt too far away. Chicago hummed outside her window, indifferent, constant. She sat there until 2 a.m., not thinking exactly, just letting the evening move through her the way cold moves through a building when someone leaves a window open slowly, completely finding every room. Monday came. HR was brief and professional and said nothing that actually meant anything. Her portfolio was being realigned. Her current assignments would be redistributed to ensure optimal client service. She was to remain available for internal matters while the review was conducted. It was the language of erasure dressed in corporate grammar. She nodded through all of it, thanked them, walked back to her desk. There was one missed call on her personal phone, a Chicago number she didn't recognize. No voicemail. She stared at it for a moment, then set the phone face down and opened her laptop. She did not call back. Tuesday passed, then Wednesday. The missed call sat in her phone like a splinter she was trying not to touch. She told herself it was nothing, a wrong number, a solicitation. Anything except what some part of her already suspected it was. On Thursday morning, she was standing in line at the coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment when the woman behind her said quietly, "Excuse me, are you Naomi Carter?" The lawyer. Naomi turned. The woman was holding her phone out screen first. The headline on the Chicago Business Journal read, "KW Group moves to establish Chicago Legal Division Naomi Carter JD, named as sole candidate for general counsel position." Naomi stared at it. The woman said something else. She didn't hear it. She paid for her coffee, walked outside, stood on the sidewalk in the November air, and read the article 3 times her breath, making small clouds in the cold. KW Group, General Counsel, her name, in print, on the city's most read financial publication. Her phone began to ring, then again, then again. Numbers she recognized, names she hadn't heard from in months. A partner from Callaway and Walsh who had never once acknowledged her in the hallway. A headhunter she had emailed 2 years ago and never heard back from. 3 former law school classmates in rapid succession. She let them all go to voicemail. Then she found the missed call from Tuesday, and she called it back. Ji-hoon answered on the second ring. No greeting, just, "I'm at the office." 3 words, as if she had already agreed to come. She thought about saying she hadn't. She thought about asking what gave him the right to put her name in a newspaper without asking her first. She thought about the elevator and the corridor, and the 3 days of silence that had felt in the small hours of Wednesday morning, like confirmation of everything Veronica had said. She thought about all of it. Then she got in a cab. The KW building was on Wacker Drive, 52 floors of black glass that caught the November sky and gave nothing back. The lobby had no reception desk in the traditional sense, just a single man in a dark suit who looked up when she walked in, said her name before she gave it, and directed her to an elevator that opened directly into the 48th floor. The elevator doors parted onto a space nothing like what she expected. No mahogany, no trophy walls, no gallery of framed deals and handshakes with powerful men. Just clean lines, low furniture, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides, and the city spread out in every direction like a map of everything Ji-hoon Kwon had decided to understand. He was standing at the window when she arrived, turned when he heard her. He looked the same as he had at the gala, unhurried, contained, dressed in dark gray no-tie like a man who had decided years ago that performing power was less efficient than simply having it. "You put my name in the paper," Naomi said. She hadn't decided to lead with that. It came out anyway. "Yes," without asking me. "Yes." She waited for the explanation. He didn't offer one immediately, and she had learned in the past 72 hours that Ji-hoon Kwon's silences were not gaps. They were choices. "I don't need charity," she said. "I told you that." "I know." He moved away from the window, gestured briefly toward the seating area. "I also know that Walsh filed an internal performance review against you on Saturday morning. Backdated documentation. 3 complaints that don't exist." He paused. "I know because the paralegal he asked to prepare the file called a contact of mine before she did it." The air in the room shifted slightly. Naomi stayed very still. "What kind of contact?" Ji-hoon looked at her steadily. "The kind that exists in every building in the city. The kind that knows when something is happening that shouldn't be." A beat. "I told you I protect what I decide to protect." "You decided that in one evening?" "I decide quickly." "I don't decide wrong." She studied him. The city moved behind him through the glass, distant, enormous, unaware of this conversation. She thought about Walsh, about the backdated file, about 4 years of work being quietly dismantled by a man who had decided she was a problem to be managed. She thought about what it meant that Ji-hoon had known before she did, and what it meant that he had acted before she asked him to. "I want a real interview," she said finally. "A full panel, real selection criteria. No one in that room knows we've spoken." Something shifted at the edge of his expression. Not quite a smile, closer than she had seen before. "Thursday," he said. 10 a.m. She nodded, picked up her bag. She was at the elevator when he spoke again. "Naomi," she turned. "Walsh's performance review was withdrawn this morning." A pause. The paralegal who prepared it also resigned. She cited a hostile work environment. 3 other associates have since submitted corroborating statements to the Illinois State Bar. The elevator doors opened behind her. She looked at him for a long moment. "You did all of that," she said, "before I called you back." Ji-hoon said nothing, which was she was beginning to understand his way of saying yes. The conference room on the 48th floor had 5 people in it. Naomi had prepared for all of them. She had spent the previous 2 days the way she always prepared, methodically, completely, without the luxury of assuming anything would be given to her. She had researched KW Group's legal exposure across 4 active jurisdictions. She had identified 3 structural vulnerabilities in their current contract language that no outside counsel had flagged. She had built a 90-day framework for establishing a legal division from scratch, with cost projections and staffing models. She walked in at 9:58 a.m. with a single folder and the particular stillness of someone who has nothing left to perform. Ji-hoon sat at the far end of the table. He said nothing when she entered, gave no indication that they had spoken before. The panel introduced themselves: two senior executives, a compliance director, a finance lead, and Marcus Lim, head of strategic partnerships, who looked at her resume for a long moment before looking up. "Ms. Carter." His voice was measured, careful. "Your background is strong for associate-level work, but KW Group's legal exposure operates at a different scale. Deals in the nine-figure range, multi-jurisdictional risk, regulatory environments that shift quarterly." He set the resume down. "You've never operated at this level. Why should we believe you won't drown?" The room waited. Naomi looked at him steadily. "Because I've been winning at the level above me for 4 years," she said, "using resources built for someone else." She opened the folder, slid 3 pages toward the center of the table. "This is a structural analysis of KW Group's current contract language across your Midwest acquisitions. 3 exposure points your outside counsel hasn't flagged: 2 in the indemnification clauses, 1 in the force majeure language that became relevant after the 2023 regulatory amendments." A pause. "I identified those in 48 hours using public filings. Imagine what I find with access to the actual documents." Silence. Marcus Lim looked at the pages, then at her, then at the pages again. At the far end of the table, Ji-hoon had not moved. He was watching Naomi with the same expression she had seen at the gala. Not assessment, not calculation. Something quieter than both. Something that looked in the November light of the 48th floor a great deal like certainty. The panel asked 11 more questions. She answered all of them. She walked out at 11:23 a.m. and stood in the hallway with her folder against her chest and let herself breathe for the first time in 90 minutes. The door opened behind her. Ji-hoon stepped into the hallway and stood a few feet away. No announcement, just presence, the way it always was with him. "Marcus Lim is difficult to impress," he said. "I noticed. He looked at your analysis for 4 minutes before the next question. He doesn't do that." "Was that a compliment?" "It was an observation." The corner of his mouth moved, that almost not a smile she'd cataloged twice now. "They're the same thing from me." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. They stood in the quiet hallway, and for a moment it felt like the window again, the two of them slightly outside of everything, the noise of the world on the other side of a wall. "I need to tell you something," Ji-hoon said. She caught the shift in his voice immediately. "I came to that gala because Walsh had been soliciting KW Group for 8 months. My team reviewed the firm, the work, the people, the internal structure." A pause. "Your name appeared 4 times in case analyses credited to other partners. I had already decided before that evening that if you were in the room, I would find out whether you were what the work suggested." Naomi went still. "You came to see me specifically." "I came to confirm what I suspected." He paused. "I didn't expect the rest of it." She looked at him. "What is the rest of it?" "I built everything I have on discipline," he said quietly. "On not moving toward things I couldn't quantify. For 19 years, that worked. A beat. You are the first thing I could not quantify and move toward anyway." The hallway was completely quiet. She stayed with those words, not just the surface of them, but the weight underneath. For a man who controlled every variable in every room he entered, what he had just said was not small. It was the most expensive thing he owned. And he had set it down without being asked. "The job first," she said. "Everything else slowly." "I have time." "You keep saying that because it keeps being true." She almost smiled, then did fully without guarding it. The first real smile she had given anyone in this building. It lasted only a moment, but he saw it, and she knew he saw it, and neither of them looked away. 8 months later, Naomi watched a federal mediator read aloud the settlement terms of a case she had spent 6 months building. $340 million. Preserved. Across the table, Marcus Lim leaned toward her and said simply, "Good work." She accepted it without performance. Callaway and Walsh had not fared well. The firm lost 4 major clients in the months following the gala. Walsh resigned in February. Brent Holloway left the industry. Veronica Hale lost her largest lobbying contract in March, the result of a compliance review that had emerged quietly from nowhere in particular. Nobody traced any of it to a single sentence spoken in Korean on the night of the gala. Nobody needed to. Ji-hoon and Naomi did not announce anything. There was nothing to announce, no declaration, no public moment, only the accumulation of small things. Coffee on her desk before she arrived, his jacket on the back of her chair after late nights. The way he positioned himself slightly between her and doors, she hadn't noticed yet. Slow, real, earned. One evening, long after the building had emptied, she found a folded piece of paper on her keyboard. 3 Korean characters in his handwriting. She photographed it, sent it to him. What does this say? His reply came in 40 seconds. Look it up. She opened a translation app. The result loaded. I see you. She sat with that in the quiet of the 48th floor, Chicago enormous and indifferent beneath her, completely unaware of the thing that had just settled finally completely in the center of her chest. Then she typed back, I see you too. His response was immediate. I know. She laughed. It echoed in the empty room. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't reach to quiet it. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a room full of powerful people isn't the power. It's the one person who refuses to disappear. Naomi didn't fight back loudly. She didn't make speeches. She didn't demand to be seen. She simply kept being exactly who she was, in a world that had spent 4 years trying to convince her that wasn't enough, until the right person looked up from the noise and finally noticed. And Ji-hoon, a man who had spent 19 years deciding that control was safer than connection, who had built an empire on knowing exactly what every room cost before walking into it, and then walked toward something he couldn't calculate, because for the first time, the math didn't matter. That's the thing about real connection. It doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it arrives on a cold balcony, 47 floors above a city that doesn't care. Sometimes it looks like someone choosing to sit beside you when every other person has already decided to look away. So I want to ask you, have you ever been in a room where you felt completely invisible and chose to stay anyway? Have you ever met someone who saw exactly who you were without needing you to explain it? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and which moment hit you hardest. If this story moved something in you, like it, share it, subscribe. Because every week I'm here with stories about the kind of love that doesn't ask you to be smaller to deserve it. I'll see you in the next one.